Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt, Collectivism Exposed. Written by Mikkel Clair Nissen. Narrated by David Bucci. Chapter 4. Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt. Severe pathological narcissism and the resultant codependency lead the collectivist, who can hypocritically not take personal criticism, to turn one's attention completely away from oneself in an attempt to hide from one's impaired personal feelings and self-image. Instead, the person focuses one's attention on compulsively correcting, policing, and criticizing other people's behavior. The reason behind this, and the key to conformity, is that every citizen is their own imaginary police officer. Therefore, to pry on others is overly common, truly ordinary even in public, often to the extent that it is encouraged and done with pride. What makes a pedestrian in Denmark stop at an intersection at 3 o'clock in the morning while the light is red in the middle of nowhere without a car in sight? Imagine if the police only drove in undercover cars, then no one would ever know who the police were. This is exactly how collectivism works. When habituated slowly all through life, narcissistic coercion, policing and prying, combined with the resultant inferiority complex, creates anxiety from the sense of being under constant surveillance. One is held by an invisible force, Big Brother within, that stands guard against society's citizenry through self-intimidation, the weapon of guilt. Oppressive collectivist mentality can be compared with a secret police group like the KGB or Gestapo. In Denmark, Marxists do not yet have an actual secret police that can eliminate the threat of the nonconformist. That is why severe pathological narcissism is so extremely dominant in Denmark. As mentioned before, because democracy in itself cannot radicalize collectivism, manipulism, malignant narcissistic coercion, replaces the Marxists' lack of oppressive fascist power. What is used here in a higher degree? The weapon under the USSR with the KGB, German Democratic Republic, GDR, commonly called East Germany, with the Stasi, and Nazi Germany with the Gestapo was to force guilt upon offenders. The cost would be great should an individual in Denmark break free from one's place in society. The Danish citizen who heard about an individual standing out in any way from the majority, by criticizing Denmark or by dressing or thinking differently, would coerce and force guilt upon the offender. Often passive coercion, resulting in self-intimidation, accomplished in public is achieved through silent projection, simply by staring. In the GDR after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was discovered that a third of East German residents had turned in a comrade, friend, relative, or spouse to the Stasi, the abbreviated name for the Ministry for State Security. This demonstrates the true power of guilt, self-intimidation, and spying used in socialism, communism, and fascism, all forms of collectivism. 1. Inhibition. Don't question or criticize society, its citizens, or society's structure. Freedom of speech in democratic socialism, in reality, stretches no further than the collectivist's right to denigrate other nationalities, lifestyles, traditions, or ways of thinking. Hence, this in turn provides the necessary means for ensuring the continuation of collectivism's equilibrating mental and societal subjugation. However, hypocritical as collectivists are, freedom of speech never includes exposing the truth about them. An untainted ideology is built on positive critique as proof of its pure intentions. If one cannot write a 10-page criticism on the flaws of one's philosophy, one either has no philosophy or does not understand it. Surely, rather what one has is conformist authoritarian collectivism. Totalitarian behavior. Collectivists are indoctrinated to see absolutely no limit to authority and, as a consequence, do not question or criticize society. Totalitarian behavior goes hand in hand with malignant narcissism and relates to scornful envy, in addition to arrogance caused by hypersensitivity to criticism. As well as being the strongest argument that supports disproving any claim that Denmark is the happiest nation on earth, this collective societal rule, which still results in life imprisonment in China and even the death penalty in totalitarian collectivist societies around the world, would most undoubtedly be what makes collectivism so awfully dangerous. An inability to question or criticize society enables the state to do absolutely anything to its citizens. This fascist measure in a society like Denmark's is kept slightly in balance only by the center-left-wing social-liberal side of society. However, since democracy strips collectivists of their more preferable fascist approach, the collectivist is instead forced to turn to their second alternative, mental coercion. This undoubtedly is one of the easiest ways to prove how predictable authoritarian people truly are. Once having broken the specific inhibition, it takes only a few minutes, sometimes only seconds, to bring forth the collectivist's best defense. With almost no exceptions, when this particular inhibition is triggered, the result is a simple defensive expression that is repeated commonly in Danish society, so much so that one would think it has an actual Danish copyright. It has two forms, one declarative and one interrogative. If you are not satisfied, then move away. If you are not satisfied, then why don't you move away? Note: both examples are subjectively coercion. The second example demonstrates the reverse psychological approach. This compulsive coercive expression can be identified quite quickly as feelings of grandiosity. Be like us, the collective human organism, or you are not welcome. This statement shows proof of the collectivist's excessive sense of entitlement, that society is all but fictitious solidarity, as well as proof of my theories of assimilation. Collectivists, codependent as they are, adopt words, statements, and phrases to achieve acceptance and to attain narcissistic supply, feelings of excessive self-importance and moral superiority, through being affirmed. However, this varies amongst numerous defensive expressions. For example, opposing Obama makes you a racist. Do you think you have the truth? Libertarians, right-wing, only think about themselves. Some expressions are sometimes stated in a nicer way than others, but always the intention is reverse psychology with the purpose of intimidating and manipulating by utilizing the weapon of guilt. This is a truly effective coercion when habituated all through life. Malignant narcissism, subliminal conditioning, creates an intellectual wall, the subconscious communist iron curtain, that perfectly immobilizes the critic from any criticism or questionability toward society. With almost no exceptions, this comment, impulsively triggered by an inability to process criticism naturally, excessive entitlement, and magical thinking, manipulates the critic away from the true subject and simultaneously enables the collectivist to move on by ending the conversation. 2. Inhibitions. Don't express uniqueness. Don't express individuality. Don't express self-assurance. All these inhibitive rules produced by feelings of severe pathological narcissism, which generate envy and the urge to feel equal, result in arrogance and excessive entitlement. This emotional process can generate narcissistic rage. Malignant emotions of resentment, attitude, irritation, anger, and aggression. Narcissistic rage results in a subconscious narcissistic reaction, a sign of danger triggered when a citizen expresses self-encouragement or individuality. In fact, expressing self-assurance or individuality is a sign that the individual is lifting one's self-esteem, and at the same time, this is a true sign that the person is liberating oneself from the collective human organism. 3. Inhibition. Don't try to educate. As already thoroughly described, collectivism generates a society that designs ways to indoctrinate its citizens, to maintain complete intellectual control of its citizens. Society is therefore perfectly designed, through the state-owned educational system, from daycare through university, and in large parts through the state-owned public media, by controlling what people are allowed to know, to keep people from gaining any insight into new and perhaps better perspectives or ways of thinking. This control extends to a need to prevent any foreign influence on society, and especially to prevent people from knowing the truth about narcissistic collective oppression. What truly stands out as a vital part in creating and containing the collective human organism is therefore this exact rule: arrogance, magical thinking, disables anyone from teaching the collectivist the factual truth about collectivism's pathological mind game. This course has completely destroyed all natural respect for age and wisdom, and as well has destroyed the cognitive development process. As mentioned earlier, this personal story proves why totalitarian collective societies restrict information and the right to travel. To prove my point, when claiming that collectivists believe that they always personally know best, I only have to refer to this rule. However, this omniscient, arrogant attitude is actually not imposed because collectivists believe that they themselves truly know better. It is simply their subconscious, deprived narcissistic defenses, hypersensitivity to criticism, an inability to process shame in natural ways, and magical thinking that create this arrogant behavior. What is truly deceiving is that, in reality, the radicalized collectivist members of Danish citizenry portray themselves as the nicest people in the world. That is, of course, only possible until one observes or triggers their psychological disadvantages. Raising your voice just the tiniest bit, in fact, even the least bit of excitement, will often trigger the collectivist to feel intimidated. A radicalized person can be your best friend one moment and your worst enemy the next. Unpleasant behavior, arrogant attitude, or narcissistic rage is in most cases emotionally triggered by the least bit of disapproval, contradiction, or exposure to undesired facts and insights. Once the animosity is released, this person will often try cunningly to befriend you again a split second later. Largely influenced by appearing superior to the collectivist's sense of worth, the collectivist will display grandiose feelings of self-importance. This inhibition against superiority, excessive entitlement, is commonly triggered when an individual tries to explain or educate a collectivist. Reading about or hearing information contrary to the collective thought results in the undermined person intuitively displaying excessive moral superiority, attempted coercion through projections, utilizing the weapon of guilt. On the other hand, these emotions of severe pathological narcissism can be withheld, but this is only likely to happen if 1. The collectivist sees some benefit for personal gain, 2. The undermined person has personally taken the first step by showing interest or asking directly. However, by referring back to point 1, this is usually the cunning attempt to manipulate or use reverse psychology. And 3, the individual who breaks these inhibitive rules is someone of unique status, for example, a teacher or a tourist vacationing in Denmark. Excluding these emotions results in a truly deceiving yet absolutely vital dynamic that blinds anyone who doesn't know the truth about the collective pathological mind game. After all, a collectivist will never reveal collectivism's negative aspects. Even though my birth language is Danish, for purposes of researching the language barrier, I often speak English when I go out. To some extent, speaking English allows me to be me, because a collectivist will not treat a potential convert in the same way as someone who is already a part of the collective human organism. After all, Marxism is the world's newest religion, doctrine. In fact, socialism has replaced religion in Denmark, where less than 3% of the Danes practice religion. Instead of praising a higher power, Danes seek complete contentment through the entitlement benefits and narcissistic supply achieved through the collective human organism. An everyday story. A great example of how easy it is to trigger the collectivist's inhibitions of inferiority is the story of when I invited my brother and an American friend along on a ski holiday to the French Alps. Midweek, a snowstorm hit the mountain, and all but one beginner slope was closed. My friend came up with the idea that to use our time best, he would teach me how to snowboard. My brother chose to stay behind, and we went to snowboard. A little under 2 hours later, my friend and I, 2 proud boys, returned to the rented apartment and enjoyed the afternoon by talking about how quickly I had managed to master the snowboard. The joy only lasted a few hours because my brother exploded in frustration over the continual encouragement he had to witness. My brother's typical collectivist narcissistic behavior created such a resentful atmosphere that we barely spoke the rest of the holiday. Keep in mind that we are talking about my brother, who of course is forced by the family relations to have a higher tolerance than the average collectivist friend or acquaintance. The theory of manipulism can be divided into 3 categories of coercion. The first is direct and obvious, through contemptuous manipulism. The second is cunning and obscured, through sarcastic manipulism, and the third is reverse psychological manipulism. It is characterized by attempted enticement, in other words, by utilizing what is best known as the Svengali technique, ambient abuse or gaslighting. Here, the collectivist narcissist, at first and with cruel intent, portrays oneself as a sympathetic person by pretending to be curious about something, for example, the subject, the debate, or the other person. He or she demonstrates this curiosity by inquiring into specifics or private details. However, should you be an open individual and reveal any personal information about yourself, then the collectivist will use these against you. In an attempt to manipulate you, the collectivist will now use you against you, with the intent to create guilt as an instrument of persuasion. The Marxist collectivist narcissist tries to use the value of their opinion as a tool of impact, considering this subconsciously to represent the collective human organism. All this is a result of what, in their fantasized sense of moral superiority, is not being social. Of course, regardless of the argument, social is always in regard to the Marxist's own personal gain and need. This truly is effective exploitation of the frail mind, and it is especially effective on a collectivist whose personal ego is in fact a collective identity. The social psychological theory of manipulism is used in various ways. The military uses techniques similar to the ones used by the narcissist in collectivism to form a perfect human organism first by breaking down the soldier's mental state, and after that by building up the soldier's self-esteem. Through collective punishment and by means of setting up soldiers against one another, military officers achieve a potent personality sphere, coercion among the soldiers, that binds the perfect compliant unity. This technique effectively transfers the soldier's contentment, which the soldier then finds in his or her weapon and reliance on the troop. In the case of domestic violence, a situation that is always subject to severe pathological narcissism, abusers control the abused by lowering their self-esteem with verbal or physical abuse. The abused is eventually driven by feelings of severe inferiority and codependency. So even after the abuse is finally filed with authorities, the abused will frequently drop the charges due to emotions of guilt and the need for contentment. The contentment of the abused is now found in codependence on the abuser. This state of mind is referred to as Stockholm Syndrome. Complete authoritarian mind control by means of manipulism has been proven to be achieved quite quickly and is often seen in small communities, cults, and sects. These community groups are always subject to one of the most dangerous types of psychopathic characters, the psychopathic narcissist, as well as the cold and calculated narcissist sociopath, who cunningly exploit the frail mind for personal means and power. To the untrained eye, narcissists and narcissist sociopaths can easily portray themselves as considerate, concerned, and compassionate. Sociopaths are people who are known to avoid doing crimes by their own hands. For example, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Charles Manson, as sociopaths are generally so cunning and persuasive that they con others into doing their crimes for them. The narcissist is always in search of frail minds, ready to provide narcissistic supply, and always ready to take part of the shared psychosis, a folie à deux. To protect their ego boundaries and by means of setting up one against another, narcissists create a potent personality sphere around themselves, the sect, that operates as a perfect compliant unity. Repeatedly, methods of manipulation, ambient abuse, malignant narcissistic coercion is used. For example, Jonte Law, tall poppy syndrome, Schadenfreude, etc., creating a shared psychosis from the size of 2 to a family to a whole country, living united in their sensation of vanity. Narcissist cult leader David Koresh of the former Branch Davidians establishment in Waco, Texas, managed to implement manipulism through misusing religion for personal gain by acting out sickening sexual desires, including sexual assault, statutory rape, and bigamy. David Koresh attained complete mental control over his followers in less than a quarter century. The People's Temple, run by the narcissist cult leader Jim Jones, also managed to attain complete control over his followers in less than a quarter century. Jones did so through socialism and his misusing of the Word of God. Again, he acted to satisfy his needs for personal gain, including securing power and fulfilling his appalling sexual desires. Using undermining authoritarian mind control, his community consequently ended with a terrible outcome in which more than 900 people committed mass murder-suicide. Groupthink, known as the lemming effect, doomed the People's Temple. In both preceding examples, with no deviation from the conduct of a socialistic influence government, the process of implementing manipulism appears to be straightforward. The subject portrays oneself as thoughtful, kind, and sympathetic. This facilitates an ability to symbolize oneself as a role model, custodian, or caretaker. A human organism is now slowly formed about the subject, creating followers who promote the cause and its objective. The subject will eventually manipulate the prey to volunteer personal possessions, goods, and assets, and thereby to be cared for by the community, utilizing these personal possessions, goods, and assets to gain further power, while slowly stripping the individual of all civil liberties. Soon, tools that undermine are implemented, enabling dominance and the weapon of guilt. Eventually, followers are mentally prevented from criticizing by means of bribery, authoritarian coercion, denigration, spying, and intimidation of self and each other. The creation of a sect has been accomplished. Both previous examples resulted in Stockholm Syndrome, in which people factually defended their subjugators, though subconsciously they knew they were being abused. Irrational, but like the Danes, they still present themselves as joyful. A quote by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe: "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free."